Welcome back to One Winning Pod. It's three of us today, but not the three you're used to. Chris is officially on paternity leave. Wish him and Katie the best. Everything seems to be going well, and our benefits are awesome. He gets unlimited time off, full pay, and so his check will be coming in the mail soon. All $0. But to fill in today and to talk about something really, really cool, we have Jake Louque from Exit 52. You might have known him from his previous show at Baltimore Beatdown and the new show, The Jumbo Set. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
So, we wanted to talk to you after listening to the first 3 episodes now, at the time of recording, of your new series, The Season in Between. Kind of focusing on the 2006 season. This is not your first rodeo, though. You have another really cool, what would you call it? Like, it's almost like an audio documentary. Like, is that what you call it?
Yeah, podumentary, I think, is the term that I've heard used for, people that actually do it for a real living. It's maybe a little cutesy. You could just, audio documentary, oral history, narrative podcast, that kind of thing. A lot of names to throw around for it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. It's one word we could use for it. So you really enjoy it. And I also wanted to point out there's a companion blog. I didn't really realize this. I don't know if you mentioned it in the episode and 2 hours later I forgot, but I would want to point it out now because there's some nice little nuggets there too, on the X52 site.
Yeah. There's I think I say that at the beginning, at the bumper for each show. So if you want to get some more info on this, you can check out our website. So it's a little bit of a way to promote our website, which we're kind of still getting off the ground a little bit. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a little bit of extra info in there too. So
yeah, I noticed that too. Definitely recommend. X52 is pretty cool because you got the whole Baltimore thing going on right now. You got the Orioles, you got the Ravens, and no better time to kind of get into a show like that with how good the Orioles are doing. It's really phenomenal times.
Yeah, perfect time to pivot for sure. I think we were actually talking about that before we hopped on here, maybe a couple days ago. Some good providence there that things worked out the way they did for us.
That's awesome. I guess to start off, why did you pick 2006?
I think a lot of different reasons. I think I was just always fascinated by that team because of all the different characters involved. I mean, Steve McNair is just endlessly fascinating to me. As a guy who came to the NFL when he did. And I think it's pretty significant that he was a black quarterback in 1995 who picked 3rd overall. And that was the, I think, highest ever draft slot for a black quarterback at the time. And he kind of, I wouldn't say he broke down barriers, but he normalized it a lot more for, people of, minority colors or whatever it might be, or minority races to go on and play that position. And I always thought that was really cool. I just wanted to be a cool guy, when I was younger. This was really, and it leads into another reason, which was really, this is kind of the first season that I was following of them week to week. I had been born here to an extent, Pasadena, and then raised in the suburbs a little bit in Reisterstown, where I live now. But in the middle there, moved to South Carolina for a couple of years for my dad's work. And we came back at the end of 2005, and 2006 was kind of that first season, like I said, where following it week to week, talking with my friends in school about it. And it was a good year to do so because they wound up being really good. And then they were really bad the next year. So, I got my hopes up and everything and all that kind of stuff for, I guess, not a whole lot of good reason until a couple of years later. But those are kind of the things that stood out to me. And then, there's just that interesting dynamic in the name where it's, you don't really think about this kind of stuff unless you're weird like me. And it's right halfway between 2000 and 2012, kind of the end of one era and the beginning of another, with Billick kind of on the ropes there, and him getting together with McNair. I found that to be really fascinating. Both those guys kind of at the end of their rope, chasing a ring together. It's almost like a spaghetti Western is how I described it to Glenn Clark. Maybe that's just me superimposing my love for pop culture onto something like that. But just a lot of cool angles to attack it from, I think.
Well, I think you and I think weirdly in a certain way. Listeners of the podcast know that I love Ravens history, love doing stuff for the show with this. I really love what I've heard so far from your podcast, and both kind of hate it too, because I'm like, man, this was such a great idea. I should have jumped on it. But man, you've knocked it out of the park. You've done a better job on it than I certainly could have. I know you say you don't do this for a living, but it does come off very professional and just been a blast to listen to. And I have to say, I also find it really interesting, your perspective from the 2006 season. So, Alec and I, we're a couple years older than you. people in our demographic, we always talk about the Super Bowl season as that was our first introduction to really following a Baltimore team and rooting week in, week out, figuring out the game. And I think, just hearing about someone's experience following a team when that was their first time doing it is always just such a unique thing to hear that perspective. So, we remember the 2006 season pretty well, but again, we're coming from it for a little bit of a different perspective. We had seen the Super Bowl team. We'd seen, the years in between that season in 2006 where the Ravens had some chances and didn't quite, get the ball rolling like they did in that regular season 2006. But yeah, and I love how you've pointed out there are so many parallels between the 2000 team and this 2006 team when it comes to the regular season style of play, just going on a dominant win streak in the back half, dominant defense. That it is so interesting that they just couldn't repeat the formula. And I know you're not that far yet into the podcast, but I'm really interested to see your observations on how the wheels kind of came off. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself there. To start with, you do talk about it in the podcast a bit, but what were your memories going into the 2006 season? I know you talked about how you were always interested in McNair, so I'm sure, I think you did talk about the Ravens signing McNair was an interesting moment for you. Do you remember really what your expectations were for the Ravens and, the kind of expectations of those around you were going into that year?
I didn't really have any is the cool thing. And when you go into a year like that and something like that happens, I think the fact that they were doing so well is really what drew me in, because I had enjoyed watching them a little bit when we had Sunday Ticket or whatever. My family were all still big Ravens fans. We were living out of state, but, I would watch week to week and it would be okay, they were decent at that time. They would be right around 500. And, some years they would make the playoffs and some years they would miss out closely. That was kind of the first year where it was okay, they got something going on offense here. I enjoyed watching the defense. I always Ed Reed was my guy because he brought a little bit of that offensive flair to the team. I think I say that in the podcast at one point. But it was just a tough sell, right? For a 10-year-old kid, I think. Maybe I'm just projecting a little bit because, other people, I'm sure it captured them pretty well. But for me, I think it was finding that offensive consistency, and then the fact that they were just winning week to week. It really kind of captured my attention. So maybe I'm a little bit of a bandwagon fan. Who knows? But that's what drew me in. And I've suffered a little bit since then in certain years. It's been a good ride mostly, but there's been some tough moments. And I wouldn't trade it. So that was kind of really what started it all for me. To your point.
Yeah, it's cool that you have that connection to this season, and I do think it's funny you mentioned that both the 2000 season and 2012 season already have these kind of things because they won a Super Bowl. Everyone wants to cover that. But covering failure is almost as interesting in a way. It would be kind of cool maybe, what is this, almost 18 years now, I guess? Or what's math? I don't know. Yeah. Since that season.
That's the wrong guy, let me tell you.
Yeah, 17 years since
17,
yeah. Maybe 17 years from now, we'll do a show about the 19 season. Because honestly, you look at 19 and you look at 2006, different reasons for the success of the teams, very similar, almost experience of the season, though.
I should mention when the idea first started to germinate, this was a couple of years ago. And that really, I think that was part of it, because it's okay, these are really the two that you look at in terms of seasons in team history where it looked like they had it all together and then it just fell apart in crushing fashion, right? There have been years where they've been very good, but they go far in the playoffs and they lose in a more, conventional fashion. These are kind of the two where they climb the mountaintop and right as they're about to get there, they just get kicked off and it just completely unexpected, just knife to the back a little bit. So yeah, that's an astute point by you. And I do think that was part of what drew me to it as well.
Do you remember where you were when they lost? I remember where I was for both of those losses.
Six, I think I was just at home. I was 11 years old or whatever at the time. So yeah. There was that part of it. And then 2019, I very clearly remember where I was. I was in Federal Hill, and a lot of just buckets of Bud Lights were consumed and just sitting at our feet. And we were just drowning in our sorrows as we all realized what was happening. And it was as packed as I've maybe ever seen. I think it was at Banditos or something. And
nice. Okay.
The rage and the sorrow just, enveloped us all. And yeah. And then I went home and did a podcast. So
then we all. Peter, do you remember 06 and 19?
I do remember both of them. So '06, I will have to make a confession. I only ever saw the fourth quarter of that game. I had a basketball game scheduled right on top of it. So I've only ever seen the fourth quarter, and that was a time in my life. Gosh, what was I? Freshman in high school. Those are back in the days. I had gotten cut from the JV team, and like every white kid back then, you were like, oh, Michael Jordan got cut from his freshman team, and then look what happened there. So, I was going through, we were making a heavy push in the rec playoff bracket then. So my focus was on that, of course. So, young high schoolers are fun. But, yeah, I remember coming home from the game and like, just turn it on, and we're down, what was it, probably 12-6 going into the fourth quarter, because then the Colts had that long drive at the end there where Vinatieri iced it.
Closer game than I remembered. When I went back and watched it for this, I was like, man, they really had a shot. Like,
and that is the thing. You look at it, just some poor, untimely turnovers could have maybe pushed this game into overtime. Like, you had that interception at the goal line that McNair made where he just never saw the safety. I don't think. I don't understand why else he would throw that ball if he did. And then I'm pretty sure Heap had a fumble at like the 30 or something like that, and that killed the drive.
Yep, McNair had another pick. I think there were 3 or 4 dropped interceptions. Like, when you go back and watch it like that, and that's sort of what I get into is just the randomness of all this. Like, you can have the best year and you can have all the best statistics and all the this and that, but that's why football is why we watch every week and we get as invested as we do. It's because it can all just kind of go up in smoke in one game. It's not like other sports where you've got a series of 3 or 5 or 7. It's just the one game, and if you
absolutely
fumble it away, you fumble it away, and that you gotta live with that for a year, year plus, really.
Yeah, so, just bummer to thinking about it. So '06, I was in the Perry Hall like original steakhouse, or whatever it's called, because they have that cool like part where there's like a bazillion screens all around you in the bar area. So
wait, I thought you said it was Silver Station.
That was all of the 2012 run.
Okay.
Yeah. 06.
I can't remember. You always throw out these free advertising dollars, these places where you saw the game. I can't keep track of them all.
So that was depressing as hell. And then 19, this is the wildest thing. 19, we like had scheduled a vacation. And we were in Orlando the day before our cruise was supposed to leave, or something like that. Maybe it was the other way around, like the day before we were going to Disney or something. So we're in Orlando. There's a huge Ravens community in Orlando. I go there. It's like 100+ people at this thing. So much energy. I bring like a microphone. I'm like ready to like, man on the ground in Orlando, make a special episode out of it. Completely scrapped because it was just despair, right? And then we like record an episode because I immediately had to. Yeah, it had to be right before we went on the cruise because we recorded the episode late that night. Next morning, I'm editing in the car on the way to like the cruise thing, upload it right before we get on the ship. And like,
man, I hope you still got that. It'll be useful in 17 years when you make that podcast about the 19 season.
That's right.
Exactly. Right.
We had to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So
just put in notes right now. When you make it, we've got some material for you to throw right in there at the beginning.
Executive producers.
Yeah, and I'm super quiet because like Rachel and my mom were sleeping in the thing, and like the Rush drummer just died. It was just the worst.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was all the same time. So it was really depressing. But yeah, I guess we'll get back to like the actual forgotten season here.
Yeah. Now that we've bummed ourselves out, let's remind ourselves why we even care about this year, right?
Well, you go into it on the show. I mean, they start off 4-0 and just really showing a lot of promise. And honestly, going back about expectations into the year, I was super stoked too to get a guy like McNair proven, obviously near the end of his career and had the injury woes. But after experiencing the Kyle Bowler, Anthony Wright experiment from 2005, I was keen to get some stability. I remember being burned by Elvis Gerback, thinking like, oh, like they're bringing in a guy, like this is going to help. And then that didn't obviously work out. And then the Bowler saga, you just really wanted to believe that being able to throw the ball 50 some yards on your knees was like a really important skill. Didn't turn out to be that way. And, like
you wanted to believe that. I never believed in that. I can remember.
Okay,
we would
young,
have these
right?
arguments. We would have these arguments. And I mean, basically these arguments were just us regurgitating, arguments we were hearing from the adults around us. Let's be honest, But yeah, we would have that argument all the time back when, gosh, what was this? 5th grade, 6th grade? I can't remember when we drafted Bowler. Yeah, it was 6th grade, man. 6th grade, and like I know you were on the Bowler bandwagon, and I was like, man, no, he's not going to be the guy. Like he's not showing enough.
It's like what you're supposed to do, man. You're like, we drafted him, now he's like our guy. Like I mean, yeah, now I at least Well,
yeah, but before
I'm like, I don't know about this guy.
Before I'm too much on my high horse here for having the winning argument there, I'll also say that I was also a big Chris Redmond fan. So let's, I can't get too can't take too big of a victory lap there.
Chris Redmond, obviously, Redmond, Lamar Jackson, all Louisville guys. There's a through line there.
That's right. You know what's interesting about Redmond? I was doing for us a bit of Ravens history about biggest comebacks in Ravens history, and one of them was 2002 with Chris Redmond quarterbacking against the Browns. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, we have everything on video now. You can find like thousands of videos on Nathan Peterman highlights, but like to find some video back and just be like, who was Chris Redmond? How did he actually play football beyond what you can remember? Scant, very hard to find. There's more videotape on him of YouTube on being interviewed by some random plumbing company in Louisville.
Dude,
from a couple years ago.
Video, I trust me. I've gone through this stuff with a fine tooth comb, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I could not find anything on him. There's like some highlight video of him mostly in like Falcons preseason games. I was like, man, what are we doing? Like, there's not a whole lot from that 2002 season. Like, I try to include, for anyone that hasn't listened yet, like supplemental audio to give you some color of like what was going on at the time. So you'll get some like, there are these awesome like mic'd up videos that are basically like what Ravens Wired are now, but like, no offense to Ravens Wired now, it's very well produced, but they were way better back then because they were way more raw, and like it was more of just like kind of following guys around. So I've got stuff in there with like Ed Reed and O2 just walking around to practice, just like BSing around with people, and like there's stuff with like, Suggs and stuff, just all these guys that there's just this treasure trove of stuff that if you're curious, you can go back and find all that. Like it's all still there. That's the cool thing about the internet. That's what makes doing something like this, such a joy, because you get to really relive it. It's not just like reading off a Wikipedia page. Like it brings it to life a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
It was honestly incredible listening to all these things. That was one of the questions I want to have for you is like, what was the spelunking of yours? Like, what was this research phase like as far as where did you find all this stuff? It's like all YouTube or what?
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's like you start writing and then you just, how you get down like Wikipedia or YouTube rabbit holes at like 2 a.m. of like, people, filling pools with cement or whatever it is, or like building some cabin. Like that's me, but like with this kind of stuff. And I really got into it. You mentioned Forgotten Dynasty. Like I got into it with that. And like there wasn't as much video on that kind of stuff because that was in, the 50s, 60s, 70s to a large extent. But you go back and you find like these Sports Illustrated gamers from like 1968, and they're like, written by like Frank DeFord or like somebody like really like, famous for sports journalism or just journalism in general. And it's like, you read all of that. It's just this very well detailed thing. And they give all this color and they show their personality in it. You kind of look at the state of journalism today and like, no offense to anyone, I don't think it's their fault. I think it's just the state of what the world is. It's just so much different now where it's just very rote and everything is just all or nothing. And if you're making money, then you stick around and, you do whatever you can do to just keep making money off of the consumer. But back then it used to be a lot more artistic, I think. And so I would get into those rabbit holes with Forgotten Dynasty. And like I said, that was much more kind of like reading off of those gamers and stuff. I started to get into more like video of it, the more modern it got. But again, that was spanning like 30 years. This really spans probably close to like, 15 years at most. But it does spend a lot of time in that early 2000s era. And there, like I said, there's just so much stuff. So really it's kind of just starting with the script and writing it out. And that kind of does start with just reading the Wikipedia page and seeing the broad strokes of what happened. But where it starts to get fun is like, okay, like what happened here? What happened here? And like, I didn't remember, for example, that Fossil had gotten fired. So like I got a decent bit into the regular season, like writing it. And then I was like, oh shit, like I missed that Fossil got fired. Like I have to go back and rewrite this. So like you go down that rabbit hole, you go back. And you fix it a little bit, or you work around a certain storyline, and there's just a lot of different things like Ray Lewis requesting the trade, and like, was that contractual? What was going on there? And then I did a couple interviews. I did one with John Eisenberg, who was a columnist at the time for the Baltimore Sun. Then he worked for the Ravens years later, and he was very knowledgeable. So I did include stuff with him, and then with Wade Harmon, who was a coach as well. And yeah, man, it's just kind of piecing a puzzle together a little bit. It really it fires the synapses for me. It's fun.
Yeah, you certainly found a ton. I pride myself in remembering a ton of random Raven stuff, and I'll admit I actually had completely forgotten that Ray had requested a trade after the 2005 season. It's possible that I never really actually knew that because, again, we're talking about an age 2005. I think we had just gotten cable TV. We still had dial-up internet, so it was a lot harder to get information back then in those days with those resources. But that one I think was really crazy to think, had the Ravens not done what they did, get McNair to help out the offense, and then for them to have the success that they did that year. You might look at Ray when, March 2008, when he tested the free agent market, he may have very well have left or might have been gone before that. And gosh, think about how crucial he was to the next 6-7 seasons. But yeah, I mean, it's so interesting going back to expectations of this team. I feel like having grown up with it, 2000 kind of got our fan base a little overzealous in our expectations, I guess. You win a Super Bowl the way we did with that dominant defense and basically no passing game. And I think the thought process for a lot of fans was just our defense is so dominant. We can run the ball so well. How amazing would we be if we just had a quarterback who doesn't turn the ball over, right? So, even though 2005 was such a dumpster fire of a year for so many reasons, I think that once we found that we were going to get McNair, even though he was coming off 2 years where he wasn't quite, the MVP self that he had been in 2003, I think a lot of fans were eager to write it off to how he was just injured, and the Titans, they weren't really trying to win around him. And yeah, I can remember, even coming off 2005, worst season we'd had since 97. In some ways, the worst season ever for the Ravens, particularly because of, the lack of discipline they had in the first month of the season. That game in Detroit is still probably one of the most embarrassing, maybe the most embarrassing display the Ravens have ever had in franchise history. That game was just awful.
Yeah, Bart Scott throwing the flag, right?
Oh yeah, and there was other stuff in that game too. There was just when you were discussing in the pod that Ray was having some issues with Billick's handle on the team, I think that was probably pretty forefront in his mind was the first half of 2005. But
yeah, and I think you don't want to sensationalize and you don't want to make it into more of a story than it necessarily was. So I tried to do as much research on that, and it seemed like he really had issues. I don't think it was just contractual, and I do think to the flip side, I think it was just as big to get a guy like McNair. Ray freaking loved McNair, man. He really had a love for the guy, even when they were competitors. I really do feel like there was an iron sharpens iron thing there. And I think McNair was really just such a perfect fit from that perspective. I mean, it's unfortunate he didn't come around a couple years later and the Ravens would have had a chance to draft him. I feel like he would have been, if he had been here his whole career, it would have been amazing. And I mean, obviously he did great. He did great with the Oilers and, the Titans and everything, but I don't know. It just feels like he would have fit here like a glove as well. So that would have been really cool. But yeah, man, I think to your point, that was a huge deal for them to go and get him. And I think he really wanted that. And it did kind of settle them down a little bit for sure for that 1 year, which was big. And they had been, and it's kind of the whole theme of it is identity is very interesting because it can set a blueprint for you. It can make you, believe in yourself to a certain extent if you just do X, Y, and Z, but it can also kind of shackle you a little bit where you just go into every year and you got this great defense and it's won a Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer. All we need is this at quarterback. We don't need to, go do right. You don't need to do this on offense. Don't need to draft a wide receiver in the first round ever. And that can kind of set you back a little bit in some ways. They're very smart and I wouldn't change anything they've done really. Well, I wouldn't say anything, but I wouldn't change a lot of the things they've done over the last 25 years. But yeah, I mean, I just think that all these issues we've been having with wide receiver and that we had with them hanging on for Joe Flacco, maybe a little bit too long. I do think it kind of goes back to that 2000 season where it's Trent Dilfer, just good defense, hang in there. That's our identity, right? And I think that's great, but it can shackle you down a little bit without you even realizing it.
I think it's so well put. I think it did kind of pickle our brains. Or you figure out a defense, get a run game, that's at least 10 wins right there.
And that's another thing with episode 4 goes pretty, not to spoil it too much, but it does go heavily into this is really the time where things started to change, man. 2004, Bill Polian and Jeff Fisher file a complaint with the league about pass interference and making that more of a point of emphasis because of Ty Law, mobbing some Colts tight end on some play or something like that. And that completely changes the sport. Next season, Peyton Manning goes out and throws 48 touchdown passes. And, it looks like the sport is on basically this new horizon, and it would turn out to be that. It would, maybe go a little bit slower than you might have expected. But ultimately, that's what we're looking at now, really, with Mahomes and with all these guys. I really do think that's a byproduct of how the league was changing at the time, and were the Ravens kind of, with the way that they were set up, were they kind of a dinosaur with some comet approaching, right? With this league, turning into something that they were not built for. And ultimately, it didn't really turn out that way, thankfully. That's why it's, a season in between, and they get Flacco, and they surround him with some offensive weapons and get him the coordinator he needs, and look what happens. But it's just it was a really interesting time, I think, and they were interestingly built for that time. Let's just say.
One thing I wanted to focus on too is episode 1 is a lot about Billick and his relationship with Bisciotti. And I've commented before on the show that I was a little surprised Billick never got a chance to coach again after the, his firing, here. And then like listening though to your show, it kind of reminded me because I wasn't too tuned in. I was thinking about when you guys were talking about like reliving this material. I had no computer in 2006. There was a single TV with cable, and I didn't have the remote. That was my mom, right? So like, it's like I didn't watch that much, ESPN or whatever. Like I didn't see probably a lot of this stuff that existed. Didn't have the internet to see even like pictures, or columns or whatever. So like, there's a lot of material I probably could like really enjoy going back and experiencing. But to that point, like, now that I listen to your show, I was like, maybe that's why Billy didn't get hired. He was just a real. I know that I always knew that he was a big personality, but the way that he was almost stubborn, and just would do his thing, particularly with how the league was changing. Maybe people didn't like that going into a new relationship.
Which is so funny because he gets hired as this offensive mind, right, from Minnesota right. With Randy Moss and Randall Cunningham, and it's like he's going to come in and he's going to sell seats in the new stadium, and like everything's going to be great offensively, and it just kind of it goes back to that identity thing where it's all of a sudden very different. And he's commented before, like, I found myself in this position I wasn't fully prepared for, right? I'm from this Christian BYU, and I'm this offensive guy, and all that kind of stuff, but he finds himself in charge of a bunch of defensive guys. And, I think really to his credit, and I think it was on this ESPN special or NFL Films, maybe it was like kind of a joint production where he's sitting down with Steve Sabol. And one guy, I think it was like Vic Carucci or one of these reporters, made the comment that like, they talk a lot about his ego and how he lets his ego get in the way of everything that he does. Probably true in some respects, but he really had to cede his ego and set it aside in that season when you really think about it, because he saw this team full of badasses with big personalities, and it was not, to the point, it was not really in keeping or in line with his upbringing or who he was, but he set that aside for the greater goal of going on to win. And I think that really was a pretty selfless thing. I mean, it was his meal ticket to a Super Bowl, so of course he was going to do it, but to be able to do it and do it in the fashion that he did, it really was, it goes to show that coaching is more than just X's and O's sometimes. And I think he was quite a figure, man. He was one of a kind. And yeah, I think like he didn't get a coach. I get into this a little bit in episode 4 with him getting fired. Spoiler alert. But it felt like he really didn't want it. Like his heart just kind of wasn't in it, I don't think. And he loved the cameras and everything. So getting into the media was a natural transition. So, he's been doing that for the past 15 years, whatever it's been. And then I think he's done some like side kind of things, these things that like football guys get, when they're still kind of a part of the mafia. So their friends will throw him a little bone and have him be in like the personnel thing. Like, I think he's done some of that for like Arizona State or something, but I don't know. I think he just kind of like, he's one of these guys that exited stage left at the right time. Like he did what he was going to do, and he won a ring, which, that's better than most coaches do in the history of the sport. And, he got his money, and I think he lives on the Eastern Shore now, and he's just kind of living the good life, man. So yeah, he's another guy that just really was a big reason why I wanted to do this, because like, I don't know how you guys are with this way, but I am not the most self-confident person in the world sometimes. So to like see somebody like that who is just relentlessly self-assured, to his detriment at times, sure, but like, I don't know, I think it really helped him. Like I'm endlessly fascinated by that. So
no, I definitely get what you're saying. I feel like I'm someone who I mean, has confidence, but then I'm all, I feel like probably the three of us can all relate to this. You're too smart for your own good. You're just like, things that can happen, or like, you don't want to seem too overconfident away, and you're thinking about, okay, well, if I'm coming on too strong here, am I, losing ground in this point that I'm trying to make to someone? You can very easy to overthink.
Yeah, to play that straw man thing where it's like you're trying to like outwit somebody or like an argument, so you like kind of stop yourself in your own tracks. But like the funny thing is, like, he is as smart as like anyone if you really listen to him. Like, these topics, and there's some of it in the show. Like I said, like he's like he's quoting Shakespeare, and he big movie buff and all this, big history guy. Super smart, but also just he didn't have that thing that stopped him. Like he would not stop in an argument. He would not, But and also like he would get into arguments like John Eisenberg said on the show, like we would get knocked down, drag out fights, and then I would walk away with a smile on my face because he was just that charismatic. Like he would still make you like, there was still like a little bit of a warmth to him, which I think if he didn't have that, like he would have been gone like that, because a guy like that might be a little overbearing or, even unbearable at a certain point. But, there was a really dynamic energy to him that's fascinating to look back on. I don't think they really make him like that anymore.
I obviously don't know Billick, but I think something that helps a person like that he was clearly intelligent and clearly, even here in sometimes the interview, he'll cede sometimes where like, after time has passed, he'll be like, oh, maybe I came on too strong, like in the media, or, maybe I made the wrong call here. I think back to, if you've ever watched the footage they've had of him where he was on that old 70s game show, Match Game or whatever, while he was still at BYU.
Yeah, and he just the trailer for the first episode, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and he bombed it. Like, he's on national TV at that point, and his answer to one joke, I forget what it was, but it was just like, first off, it was so unfunny, and it kind of came off kind of wrong too, that like everyone on the studio was just visibly groaning. And like, I think you look at that footage, he called his composure there pretty well, and I think that's a skill that helps people in that situation, who are intelligent, but still have that confidence. It's just like not caring about what happens, but just having a thick skin to weather it, to weather and understand like, hey, when you put yourself out there, you're going to fail a lot, but sometimes you're going to succeed, and just like figuring out how to weather that certainly helped him in Baltimore. I think that's one of the reasons we got the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, he had to face off with a media contingent that was, not a huge fan of his at times. Mike Preston being a good sparring partner of his, I think, in a good-natured way, sometimes in a way that would really irk him and piss him off. And that was one of the guys. And then obviously the Super Bowl, you had, Ray Lewis with the murder trial and everything. And he really had to take the heat for that. And like, he was more than willing to go out there and do it. And I mean, you got to give him credit, because like, I certainly would not be able to stand up in front of 200 people and kind of rail at them a little bit in the way that he did. And that's another thing that he conceded, where it was like, maybe I, was a little too emotional there. But if you think that didn't fire his players up to see them up there defending him like that, like, I don't know. I think if nothing else, it certainly did that. So
the other thing that's a really crazy storyline that you get into with this show is you discuss the Terrell Owens side quest, I think, pretty well. And the kind of like, again, going back, I remember that trade, and I remember a little bit of discourse from like ESPN and watching it kind of unfold there. But this was a really good way to go back and like really hear the specifics of everything that went down and get reminded of it. And then to go ahead the next season and pick up Derek Mason, who is probably one of the best wide receivers the Ravens ever had. I think we've even discussed on the show, he might be the best. That like, he was just an absolute trooper, reliable. And then to pair him with his mate McNair the year after. I don't even know if that ever happened before. This kind of like transfer of the number one target and his
probably Brady with Gronk was the recent one, right?
Oh yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
that's not even really like guys in their prime. I mean, that was kind of the end of the run for them, but that's one that I would think.
Yeah, definitely rare.
Good call. Yeah, so like, I just thought that was really cool to talk about too, and super on topic, so to speak, because we just did a show a couple weeks back about the history of wide receivers. We briefly talked about the Terrell Owens bit because he didn't really exist, on the Ravens. But that is another piece, I think, where you look at the season between and just a constant storyline with this franchise is dealing with these older wide receivers, trying to figure out the position.
Yeah, like he probably would have worn out his welcome, right? Like he probably would have been there for 3 or 4 years and then pissed off John Harbaugh if that was the same timeline we're talking about. In the Bioshock Infinite, alternate worlds we're talking about. Like, are they going to get along? I don't know, but like he would have. I really think there's a chance he could have settled in because like Ray Lewis wanted him, all those guys wanted him, they were advocating for it. I think he would have loved a lot of those guys in the locker room, and yeah, there's a good chance he wears them out, but. I don't know. I think it would have been worth it for even just the cachet of saying, okay, we can go and get this guy. And is that going to help with future free agent signings? And it really screwed them because like that year they had Marcus Robinson, who was a solid player. And he was kind of thinking that T.O. was going to be there. And he had every right to think that. And he's like, all right, well, I'm just going to leave. And I think he went to Minnesota and then T.O. backs out. And they had no one for that 05 season. I think it was the 04 season actually. And that really put them in a bind for 04 at wide receiver. And really on that chapter, like you complimented me for that. I got to give all the credit to my hitter, John Feinstein, who wrote Next Man Up, which everyone should go and read. Great book.
Great book.
Yeah. Covers the 2004 Ravens season and kind of in what you would see now with like a show like All or Nothing. That was really the precursor to that. And it's better than those shows too. So go and check that out because it does pull pretty liberally from that. And then some articles at the time from ESPN, I think too, were a big source there. Because once again, like to your point, I don't remember any of this. Like I was too young, but that helps me to get all the context I need. So yeah,
the T.O. Saga was so interesting because I can remember being a fan back in 2003. No, that was spring 2004, right? We made that trade. I can remember my dad coming home from work and saying, "Oh, the Ravens, we traded for Terrell Owens." I was like, "Oh, that's great. Who's Terrell Owens?" And then, figured out, oh, he's this excellent wide receiver. Put up all these crazy stats for San Francisco. And I was like, man, I'm so excited for it. And I get to school the next day, and I'm just like, man, telling my friends, like, man, we're going to get Terrell Owens. It's so great. And they're just like, actually, no, we're not. And I'm like, what?
I think you and the front office were equally.
Yeah. I still don't know if I fully understand everything that happened. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's freaking wild, man. But yeah, I mean, and like I probably wouldn't have gone down that rabbit hole for the interest of time, if not for the fact that I think it was a very interesting kind of foil to the Derek Mason situation, where you mentioned it, probably one of if not the best wide receiver in team history, and Ozzie said it, best free agent signing in history, certainly, and I think he'd still certainly be in the conversation. There might have been some guys since, but I'm not thinking of anybody off the top of my head. Maybe I'm just kind of blanking on it. But yeah, really, really important figure. And then obviously get into it in the episode. But he comes back and retires as a Raven. Like, I think that's a pretty big deal because he was only in Baltimore for 6 or 7 years. It was less than his time in Tennessee. He had gone to, maybe the Texans for a little bit the next year or so, but he came back and he just, I thought that was a nice capstone to say that, like, all right, Bajati's been here for about a decade now. They're about to win their second Super Bowl. This really shows that they have kind of ascended to the point of class that we kind of associate them with now, and sort of the mythology about them. Most of it true, some of it not, but you do got to give them credit for being as classy as they are, handling things the way that they do. I mean, they could have, Ozzie Newsome in particular could have walked away from that situation scorched earth. Like, he had every right to be very pissed off. And Billick went into that when it happened, saying, like, how do you do this to Ozzie? Like, he has been the consummate guy for this league. He's done everything right, and you're going to do this to him. And to his credit, man, they just rode out that 04 season with crappy wide receivers. They barely missed the playoffs, and then they go and get Derek. And you don't get much out of it in that 05 season, but it winds up working out big time, especially for the Flacco era, which is funny because he's one of these guys across those two eras, who is just a really big figure. And yeah, man, he's awesome. Love Derek Mason.
It kind of goes into the unsung heroes of the year. You have these guys that you remember, obviously. Nada, because he had a huge career. That was his rookie year, though. Fairly cool. Yeah. Another rookie that I'll say was a forgotten person that year, Dwan Landry. One of his best seasons, probably. I looked back, and maybe in 2009, you could say he had a comparable season to 2006, but tied Ed Reed with 5 interceptions that year, 3 sacks.
5th round rookie. I mean, is that any good?
Yeah, exactly. It goes back, and it was a perfect fitting story for one of the things you talked about is we just hit on the draft so often. In those years, like almost every pick hit. It was incredible. And a lot of the top picks were actual Ring of Honor players. I mean, that's hard to do. And when you do that, no surprise we had such success. And really, we were probably a quarterback away from even more success during those bowler years. The first round pick that didn't hit, right?
Episode 4, what's it going to be titled?
I don't know.
The Quarterback Away.
Damn.
Oh, there you go.
Look at that.
There you go.
Yeah, dude, lot of unsung here. I mean, like, and it kind of makes me mad at myself a little bit because, like, I didn't talk about Trevor Price at all. He was awesome that year. Like, I think he had 13 sacks or something like that. I didn't get into Jarrett Johnson very much. I feel like I should have gotten into him more. But I think what I really wanted to do was kind of group guys together. And it's almost like, you know how in movies they do like a composite character, like the Jonah Hill character in Moneyball is like multiple different. It's Paul DiPodesta, but it's like other guys too. It's kind of like Old Guard is this group of players, and like that's kind of one character to me. New Guard is this group of newer players, and that's kind of one character to me. And it's kind of like, to me, characters are the backbone of like a good story and a good narrative. So I kind of wanted to do it from that perspective. But man, if I had a little bit more time, and I've already made these things too freaking long, evidenced by the fourth episode, which is going to be like ungodly long. I probably shouldn't have committed to the 4-episode limit, but I did. Yeah, man, I would have loved to get more into Trevor Price, more into Jarrett Johnson, more into Landry. He gets a little bit of shine in the last episode because he didn't know something about. I don't even know if he knew that the Colts had played in Baltimore or something. He made some kind of comment, so you'll hear that this coming Friday. But yeah, man, a lot of special guys on this team, and would have been cool to spend more time with them. But unfortunately, it was a little bit of a bigger picture thing, I think. Yeah. So.
Well, what I will say is I think what's really interesting about the format that you're able to do is that you do go into more depth with the guys who aren't, like, say, the tier A stars of the team than some format, like, say, at America's Game or 30 for 30 really has the time to do. So,
and the resources.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, I mean, I think, while I certainly understand wanting to get to everyone, it's just like, eventually, I think you get to a point where, like, you're going down everything, and the only people listening still are like me and like a couple other people who like really want to get into the nitty gritties of everything.
That's honestly that's what I'm doing it for, though, because like those documentaries are awesome, and I pull audio from them and they're great, but I mean they're kind of really for a national audience. Like I think they're more for people that don't know this story as much or wouldn't really otherwise care, but. This one really is, I think it's one for the diehards, and I think it shows through because it, like to your point, it does get into the nitty gritty. And, I might not have the resources of ESPN or an NFL Films, obviously those guys over there. And I've actually gotten to interview some of them are awesome and they do amazing work. But I mean, that does give me a little bit of liberty to, hey, if I want to go off on a tangent about Terrell Owens for 20 minutes, when it really only philosophically serves a story. It's not like a thing that moves it forward in this propulsive manner, I get to do that. So that's maybe one cool thing about being independent.
So I'm going to throw out 3 names from this season that I think are pretty obscure when you think about the collectivity of this team. But I do think all 3 of them played an interesting role in this season. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on them before I add mine. So the 3 players I'm going to throw out here are Daniel Wilcox, Corey Ivy, and Kyle Bowler.
Nice. Well, Corey Ivy was mine, and I literally put it like a question mark, being like, I feel like he was pretty good and not talked about much, just in like Ravens lore.
Yeah, he's another guy who I think it might be in this coming episode. He has a big game, so you get to him a little bit. It's nothing crazy. It's just kind of like in the little game summaries that I do, he gets kind of a shout out. So yeah, I mean, he was another guy who he kind of just gets lost in the mix there, man. Like there's so many stars on that defense in particular, and he's a guy who. Funny enough, he could maybe mention like a Corey Graham, same first name, a guy who has awesome moments and, a big part of the history of the team in some ways. And maybe they just get forgot to history a little bit. So maybe this brings a little more cachet to their name amongst the younger crew that might not remember.
I'm curious to hear what you have to say about Daniel Wilcox, but I will throw out that he's actually done a couple shows now with Ken McCusick that are like super interesting. Oh yeah. They're really, really interesting shows. Talks about like his experience in the league and then other things as well. Really like a phenomenal interview. And I'm curious what you would say because one of my guys, Obi Mihaly, surprisingly good catcher, for a fullback. His yards per target is 7.6. It was 3rd best on the team. I was like, dang, look at this guy. I remember him being kind of dynamic, but like I was surprised going back.
He helped him win that Titans game. I don't know if he had a long touchdown or it was just a long catch.
Oh, he did.
Set them up.
Yep, he did.
So he was dynamic, man. He was you think of like an early 2000s full or mid 2000s, I guess, fullback like that. You kind of just think of the bruiser with the neck roll. No, man, he was a little more dynamic. I'd give a shout out to
Yeah.
when I was doing Forgotten Dynasty. There was this dude Ron Lee who was a fullback that Burt Jones loved, and you would watch like old video. Like they did have videos at that time in the '70s. You would watch videos of Ron Lee just getting dump offs and like trucking guys, and like this was the '70s, so it was way more violent back then. But I mean, it kind of reminds me of another guy who was just a lower name guy that people probably aren't going to remember, but a cool character. And as much as it's kind of a joke, I mean, it really is the fullback factory here, man. Indianapolis, you can have your quarterbacks, wide receivers. Where Pittsburgh, we make fullbacks here. That's what we do, and we're proud of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Mahaley, I actually almost listed off as well in that list, but I didn't want to make it too long. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, Wilcox, a guy who's unsung, but I think fans definitely remember him.
Yeah, he had a good amount of touchdowns, I think, that year. Or maybe
he did, yeah.
I mean, yeah, like I talked to, obviously, Wade was the tight ends coach that year, and he's a little bit of a personal friend of mine. So I have heard some good stories about Daniel over the year. Not a ton. It's more,
yeah.
He gets more to talk about, like Todd was his guy, obviously, but yeah, yeah, he definitely is an unsung hero, and that's cool that he sat down with Ken. Maybe we'll have to reach out to him.
Yeah,
I should have thought of it for this.
Well, specifically, I think Wilcox, he caught McNair's first touchdown pass as a Raven, right?
He did, yeah, in
that Tampa Bay game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think you look at that, and then also he had a touchdown catch in that game against San Diego that helped us put in there. Not much, but you look at those things, and like both those plays were positive in helping the Ravens get off to that 4-0 start, which really set the tone for the rest of the season.
They kind of always have a guy like that at tight end. Like they had Owen Daniels.
Absolutely.
I remember Owen Daniels in 2014 when after Pitt went, he had an even bigger role, but he was just kind of another sneaky like veteran that they brought in who had just a really good season at tight end for them. And I know people talk about the playoff game, the drop touchdown, but I don't think that's fair. I thought he had a good year that year.
He did a ton for us in a season which was so critical after Pitt went down so early. Yeah. And Bowler, you talked about it well, I think, in the pod. His play when he was called upon was erratic, but I think in some ways this year was his best year as a pro. And when he came in for McNair in the couple games when he had to, the Carolina game, even though we lost that, we still stayed in that game. And then he came in and had to play for McNair when McNair went out early in the game, the home game against Cleveland, and he did well there. I think even though he was the backup there, he had to be called in a couple times because McNair was out a couple times for injury. And maybe I'm overweighing what he did here because the rest of his career was so awful, but I felt like he kept the ball rolling on that offense when we really needed him to, and that was something that quarterback play so critical to the Ravens during those years. Just doing your job gets you the gold star there. So Bowler, again, I'm not going to say that he was the first round pick that we'd always wanted him to be when he had to step in there for McNair, but when his number had to be called upon that year, I think he answered the call the best he had at any point during his career, and I think it helped that offense continue to roll until that fateful playoff run. Yeah,
he's in the coming episode. He has a big role in a t-shirt and hat game, which is probably the high point of his career, which is awesome. And like, if anything, like if you take away something from this, one of them that I would want them to be is like, these guys are human beings, and let's treat them as such. Especially now in the social media era, it was bad for him at the time. Can you imagine if he were to go on and have the tough career that he did now? He would have been taken apart. And I don't know. Like I was really impressed by him on a personal level. I thought he came off really well. He did that interview with John Eisenberg, which everyone should go back and listen to. What Happened to That Guy is what the podcast is called. It's from like 5 years ago, maybe. Mm-hmm. And he just sat down with John for 30 minutes, and he was very candid and said, like, look, I don't think they handled development perfectly well. I think I could have used some more help at receiver. I could have used some time on the bench to start off, but ultimately, like, it's on me. I made the mistake, and like he strikes me as a pretty well-adjusted guy. And I wouldn't say he's completely like at peace over it, but he doesn't seem super embittered about it like you would expect him to be. Like, I think he's just living in Northern California now, and he's got his family and doing his thing. Maybe like owning some businesses and stuff. Yeah. He's a good interview. And I think ultimately was a good guy and a good teammate. And he does get that moment, which you'll hear in the coming episode. And when Steve completed the comeback, in Tennessee over the Titans, he's the first guy on the sideline to congratulate him after he threw that game-winning touchdown to Mason, which I thought was really cool. He obviously it didn't work out for him as a player, but it's just these guys, they're real people. So like, especially now when you've got access to Twitter and you can go tweet at Patrick Queen and you can go tweet at, like, these guys are real people and they're trying to do their best. And sometimes it doesn't work out, but let's all just be a little bit better to each other.
100% in agreement. I think overall we're making a change as a society as sports fans to do that. I think we got a long way to go. Like you're saying, Twitter is making it really, not too bad. I'll say one of the most embarrassing moments I can remember being a fan, my dad had season tickets for a little bit, 2001 to 2004. So I would go to games with him growing up. And I remember 2001, as a kid, I think you get it, but you don't understand how the world works. So you don't really understand what these guys are going through. I can remember being at the game against Cleveland. This was just Gerbach's first game back after Randall Cunningham was in there for a couple games because Gerbach got hurt. And Gerbach was just awful in that game. I think he threw like 3 picks. Cleveland beat us pretty bad. And like every time after Gerbach threw an interception, I can remember clear as day, the whole stadium just started screaming for Randall Cunningham to come in. And like, I look back on that now and I'm just like, I get the fan frustration, but it just felt so classless now in retrospect because it's like, the man's trying to do his job. If you've caught up with Gerbach at all on a little bit that he's shown, I mean, I think he's like a counselor now. He's just a human, just like the rest of us. I have no idea if he was a good guy or a bad guy. Never met the guy, but just trying to do his best. But
yeah, I think Shannon Sharp actually it's in the show. I think Shannon Sharp talks about that moment. And like he was pretty pissed off and he kind of lit into Gerbach too. And it's just like the guy was really taking it on all sides. And I don't mean to like get on my high horse here. It's totally okay to like be mad or whatever, like when the team doesn't do well.
Oh, hey, I'm not blameless myself. Yeah. Look, I'm saying what I aspire to be, not saying how I've ever, talked about any player perfectly on this show.
Yeah, no doubt. So it's just one of those things where it's like, before you tweet at these guys, just think a little bit, just, take a beat, take 5 seconds and think it over and think if it's really gonna help you. And if that helps even one person to see the light, then I'm glad I said it. Man, that's just that's really how it is, and it can be tough sometimes. But I don't know. I haven't heard much from. I think Gerbach got like sexiest man alive or something at some point, so maybe he's doing okay. But
I think that was who knows. But one last thing I want to say because before we get off this topic. I will say for Bowler, again, don't know the guy, but I will say I do appreciate it. Back in 2006, so the training camp beforehand, we would go down to Owings Mills all the time to the training camp. My brother, I guess he was 4 turning 5 at that point. Brother was obsessed with the Ravens growing up. I think his first words may have actually been "Go Ravens" or like "Touchdown Ravens" or something like that. He had a Ravens jersey that my parents could never take off. And they would like wash it every week, and he would just wear it the whole week. It was crazy. But we were staying after practice once, and everyone else was in. Bowler was out there, working with the coaches on something. And he saw that we were still there, and he came over and he took pictures with my brother and talked to us a little bit. Just like asked how we were doing, just how we liked the Ravens. The whole interaction couldn't have lasted more than 4 minutes, but still, I thought it was a nice gesture for him to come up. My brother's 5, say hi to the kid, take pictures with him, it was a cool moment. So hope he's doing well in life right now.
Yeah, it sounds like he is. And that is like a cool thing that he did. And it sounded like he was kind of that consummate teammate, the good professional. And he definitely seemed like he was hopefully still is a good dude. I would assume that he is. And like I said, when I talked to John and said, that audio is featured on the show, just, well-adjusted guy, and it just didn't work out for him. And I think it could just, serve as a little bit of an example to, these guys are real people and try not to get too crazy on them because trust me, there's nobody that wants to succeed more than they do. Like they're trying to make this thing work. And I don't know. It's why people can do what they want, but why boo? I never really get that. Why, what is that going to accomplish? All it does is get the broadcast to say, oh, they're boo. I don't know. It's just, I'm not a boo guy. I don't know about y'all.
Anti-boo. I boo boo reps. but
players are people, but umps and reps.
That's actually a good point. Joe West probably deserved it over the course of his career, and Jeff Triplett and things of that nature. They could probably take a little bit of a beating, but the players, especially the players on your team, I don't really see the utility in it. But I don't know, maybe whatever.
Peter, you said that there was a story you remembered from when we went to training camp this year.
Oh yeah, well, like I said, we went to training camp a lot of times, and reminiscing about these older years always reminds me about funny stories growing up. And for whatever reason, Alec, I hate to say it, it's just like so many of the funny stories that I remember of us growing up was like you having this great idea and like someone squashing it, and like so going to Owings Mills. Like I said, my family, we went to training camp a ton. I think one time, I can't remember if like we'd planned going to it at the same time or like we ran into you guys there or what it was, but we were watching training camp together, and then afterwards there was this sports bar and grill close by to the college.
Oh yeah, okay, I'm remembering this.
And we went to go get burgers, and we're looking over the menu, and you're like there was this burger on there was like 2-pound patty with like an egg on it. And you were just like, man, this is the burger. This is the one. This is what we're getting. And then your mom's just like Aleko, it's going to upset your stomach. You're not getting it. And you're like, fine, I'll just get the bacon burger. I don't know. There's so many of those stories like that growing up. And you're the same way still, man. But now you've got your own resources and you're your own man. You can let your hype go to 11 and and you can decide if it's a good decision or not. But
whatever burger you want now.
Man, that reminds me of that one time we had those pizzas at some like church event, and we were both like, we're going to put down this pizza, one each. We were bad times after that. Very bad times.
Probably hitting the thumbs on it.
Oh God. I still don't know how much pizza I ate that night. That was not a good idea at all. Oh man, I thought I could eat forever back in high school, and that night I found out
you could not.
I mean, I could, but I would regret it. There was a certain amount of food you could eat where you would regret it. Anyways.
Well, Jake, thanks so much for joining us on the show and again to talk about this amazing series that you put together. I mean, honestly, guys, like if you have any road trips, you're going to the beach or whatever the heck you're doing this summer, and you haven't listened to this yet, it's an amazing material. Put it on and check it out because, yeah, I mean, it's made for fans like us. Like if you're listening to a show like this or any other like third party, not Ravens media stuff, like you're probably gonna really dig it because it really gets into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the kind words and the interest, and I'm doing it for myself, and I'm doing it for guys like you, and for hopefully your great listeners who are going to check it out. It is for the diehards, I think, and it's to your point, very binge friendly. So last episode is coming out this coming Friday, so you'll have several hours of content for your commute or for your drive to the beach or your drive back or whatever it might be. So check it out.
Excellent. Well, again, guys, you can find Jake on X52. What's your I guess you're on X or Twitter, whatever the hell they're calling it now. I love how every episode now we have to talk a little bit about what's going on with Twitter.
Yeah, get after me on X at Jake Louque, and that's spelled Louque. I was talking to an ex-employee at the Orioles game this past weekend, and he is not too thrilled with the current state of his job right now.
Man.
Oh, no kidding.
Is he thinking about being an ex-employee?
Yeah, he might be. Well, it'll probably be called Twitter again by the time that he's leaving there. But who knows?
Good grief! Oh man, I'll love to hear about that offline. But anyways, wrap up. We have another interesting show coming up next week. A little tease. We're gonna be with Jason from Huddle It Up Films, and we're gonna kind of discuss maybe a little bit of a defensive change that's coming for the Ravens. Schematically, talk a little bit more about. How these players, kind of like almost an extension of our show we did with Ken was a week or two ago, talking about players are going to have different roles. So definitely stay tuned for that, and we'll catch you soon. Go Ravens.